Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we are going to be continuing our series on debunking atheist dogma. In this series, we're looking at some classic atheist arguments that are fallacious or problematic, not that are going to kind of debunk the entirety of atheism, but may cause some atheists to stop using these incorrect or problematic arguments. In this one, we're going to be looking at a big one. This is reason and faith are contradictory. I hear this said a lot by atheists. They say that if you have reason and use your reason, that you won't have faith or you shouldn't have faith in some way. I'm going to use two different arguments to show that this is just not the case. It's flatly not the case. One of them is going to be a little bit stronger, one of them is going to be a little bit weaker, but before we get to that, let's get to some definitions. So reason, we're talking about the ability to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic. We're talking about here logic, math, kind of that thinking process of going from P implies Q, therefore Q, kind of thing. Faith, on the other hand, I'll go with my classic definition of beliefs based on assumptions that aren't justified. The arguments I present here are going to apply to a lot of different versions of reason and faith. I just wanted to get these out there as definitions. If you have a different definition that you think will cause problems for my argument, please offer it in the comments below, and I'd be more than willing to respond to it. With that out of the way, let's go to the two different arguments I'm going to offer. There's a stronger argument and a weaker argument. The stronger argument is going to be that reason, in fact, requires faith. This is kind of a more skeptical argument. If you're a skeptic, you'll probably be more likely to be understanding of this argument. Basically, what it's going to say is that reason, to get started on the process of doing reasoning or anything, is going to require some degree of faith. The other argument I'm going to offer is a little bit weaker, but it should be a lot more convincing to someone that isn't as skeptical or doesn't have the same skeptical mind frame as I might. It's going to be that reason can't imply normative claims, that reason and logic isn't going to be able to imply a should or an ought or what we should do. But I'll explain that when we get there. So, first, any act of reason requires an act of faith. For Munchausen's trilemma, we must take whatever beliefs we take as basic, the Foundationalist approach, or able to justify themselves, the Coherentist approach, on faith. The laws of logic themselves rest on faith. You must have faith in your reason in order to put stock in it. If you believe that your reason is something that's working and something that's functional, you have to have faith in that. You have to believe that claim on faith, because reason isn't going to be able to supply you with a method for bootstrapping itself, for justifying itself. Reason and logic in the beginnings of knowledge don't have a way to justify themselves without creating a nasty little circle. Basically, what we have is kind of the problem of the criterion for reason and faith. Check out my video on the problem of the criterion if you're curious what that is. The version I'm presenting here is which of our beliefs are going to be justified. Well, reason, what that does is it provides us with a method of how to distinguish what to believe, but can't justify belief in reason itself. It's kind of the Methodist solution. It has a method, and it's trying to decide what is something that's justified and something that's not. The problem with it is it can't show that the method itself is justified because the only tool it has for showing that something is justified is that method. So reason bootstraps itself or creates this nasty little circle. Faith, on the other hand, provides us with beliefs that are justified, but doesn't give us a method for distinguishing justified beliefs. Having faith in something says that, yes, it's true. We have faith in it. We don't know why it's true, and we can't distinguish future beliefs as true or false, but it gives us that base, that rock, that true belief, that knowledge for us to start off with. If we combine faith and reason, we've solved our problem. We have faith, the faith in those basic beliefs, and reason, the method that can move and grow out of those basic beliefs. Without that basic faith, though, at the bottom, reason can't even get its project started. As a skeptic, I don't think faith should have a place in our pursuit of truth, so I lack beliefs, because I don't think that the process of reason can even get started. Some objections might be that there are two different kinds of faith. A reasonable faith, that's kind of a faith that's based on logic or evidence, and a blind faith, a faith that's not based on any evidence or logical claim. The proponent of this argument would probably put scientific claims in the first category and religious claims in the second one. There's going to be a problem here, though. Here's my response. This seems to both go too far and not far enough. It seems that people are going to disagree on what constitutes evidence. Some people are going to say that something being really old, or something having existed for a long time, or having been brought about by a lot of people, or believed by a lot of people, is going to constitute evidence. Other people are going to say that something involving the scientific method constitutes evidence. It seems that saying just scientific evidence is going to beg the question against the theist, and scientific evidence alone has some problems of its own. See the problem of induction, if we're looking for at least certain truth, which we seem to be here. Blind faith is going to have in its members things like the fundamental laws of logic, because they can't be based on other logical claims. The basic laws of logic have to be based on themselves. They are circular. And the only other thing we would have would be evidentiary claims. But the laws of logic seem to be things that are a priori, that we know without evidence. So this is really worrying. It doesn't seem that our distinction is going to be able to put the things we want to be in reasonable faith in there, and it's not going to be even able to exclude the things out of blind faith that we don't want to be there. So maybe we'd have another idea from the people. Reasonable faith is faith that's commonly accepted. Blind faith is faith that's unusual or strange. Should be clear, this is an ad populum fallacy. Just because more people believe something doesn't imply that it's true. And just because not very many people believe something doesn't mean that it's blind faith or that we're blindly believing it. Ad populum fallacy, we'll leave it at that. Another objection might be from the Coherentist viewpoint. This is a little bit more solid or a little more well thought out than the last one. Reasonable faith is faith that is justified in relation to the other beliefs we have. It fits in well with our kind of web of beliefs that we already had. And blind faith is going to be faith in something that opposes those beliefs that we have, that doesn't fit in well, that is something that isn't supported by our other beliefs, or is in some way in contradiction, or disagrees with our other beliefs. If you're a coherentist, you might like this explanation. However, the problem, as the problem with all coherentism, is going to be the Raft problem. It seems that in reasonable faith, we're going to have things like a completely consistent set of beliefs that claims that I'm in the matrix. As long as it's consistent internally, it's not going to matter if it's actually true in any way. It's going to be reasonable. Yet we generally wouldn't want to say that people who believe they're in the matrix are reasonable in their beliefs. And blind faith is going to be something that is like a belief in a new scientific paradigm or a new scientific hypothesis or possibility, something that opposes a lot of our former beliefs about science, but might even have evidence supporting it, or might have a series of tests supporting it. But because it opposes so strongly what we already believe in science, we would have to constitute it as blind faith. Something like a paradigm shift in science. Check out my video on Thomas Kuhn versus presuppositionalism if you're curious as to what that is, like the change over to quantum physics. Another objection might be from kind of the other big internalist viewpoint, the Foundationalist, saying that reasonable faith is faith in propositions that are self-evident, and blind faith is faith in propositions that aren't self-evident. So propositions that once you state them show that they are true themselves. Propositions like this statement is true. Something like that would be reasonable, while blind faith would be faith in those propositions that aren't kind of self-evident. You would also have, of course, in reasonable faith, beliefs that are based on those self-evident propositions, because logic would be included in there and so on and so forth. The problem, of course, is that the distinction itself is going to remain unjustified. We're not going to have a way to show that self-evident beliefs should be believed or are justified or are reasonable. Itself is going to be justified. Also, people are going to argue things like God necessarily exists is a self-evident proposition. And it's going to be tough to dispute them on this. And like I said, in blind faith, we're going to have the belief in this distinction, or in this possibility that propositions that are self-evident are justified. That's going to be something we'll have to take on blind faith, so we don't have that solid rock with which to move the world. Now we're going to move on to the other kind of less controversial idea here that it seems to me most people should accept. This is the idea that an is can't imply an ought. Basically, logic and reason are fields that talk about what is, or a specific theory. They don't tell us any normative claims about what should be, or what we should do. Reason simply tells us what it is consistent to believe, or what is inconsistent to believe. Reason doesn't make any value judgments on it's bad to believe things that are inconsistent. Reason tells you that they are inconsistent, but it doesn't say that being inconsistent is bad. Math, reason, and logic can't tell you what you should do. They can tell you the implications of the things that you already believe, but they can't tell you if those beliefs are good or bad. In order to do that, you would need something like an ethics of belief. If you're curious, check out the debate between William Clifford and William James on the ethics of belief. I'm going to do a series of videos on it in the future. For now, basically Clifford's going to say that we need some ethical principle that we're always obligated to have stringent justification for all our beliefs. If you include that in our ontology, or that in our set of beliefs, then, and only then, are reason and faith going to conflict. However, this doesn't mean that reason and faith on their own are contradictory. It only means that reason, faith, and that principle, as a triad, are contradictory. So you could just as easily say that reason and faith are contradictory with that principle, and internally consistent, because they are. We should also note that such a principle would require us to be skeptics, and it can't offer that rigorous justification for itself. That's getting into kind of the Moore's open question problem and all of that, which we'll leave for ethics, but the point is that reason and faith alone, separate from any kind of ethics, or ethical understanding, or ethical belief, are not inherently contradictory. When we add other principles, they can be. However, without those kind of doxastic ethical principles, those normative claims, there's nothing inherently contradictory between reason and faith. I'll leave you with a quote from Pope John Paul II. Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.